Not a precise science we're dealing with here. There's a lovely phrase called engineering judgment, which I always like to think is necessary when we're doing work in this area. So although or not just us, but over the years, methodologies have been developed. Always be critical, I think, when we run through these methods and think, does this really apply to my situation? However, having said that, I will give you a quick outline of what we have developed. There's a little bit of discussion about terminology here. There probably will be throughout the project, actually. Transferability, systematic transfer, I think is maybe preferred at the moment, but let's not get tied down with that at the moment. So I was just going to give an introduction to it, and then also to the transferability methodology, taking an example, which I'll come on to, and just going through with that example on a step-by-step basis. So, again, this is not an Oxford English Dictionary definition of transferability, but it's one that's, I think, reasonable here. Process of verifying the chances of successful implementation of a measure. Again, we have this thing about pioneers and adopter cities at an operational or implementation level. Well, of course, in this process, you might decide the measure's not transferable. That is quite a possible outcome. So let's not say that when you apply this, you'll automatically get a big green light that it is transferable. Depends on the context and the outcome. So we have this sort of idea of a pioneer city and adopter city. It's not always quite as clear as that, especially in some of the clusters where real innovation is going on and new things are emerging all the time, both from different cities involved in the process. So, but to try and have a systematic method, I think it is quite helpful, particularly to the cities who are thinking about implementing something which has been implemented elsewhere, and they think, well, is this really suitable for my situation? How do I know? Well, how can I check it out? So this is at least is an aid to that process, and if you can have a systematic transfer, then these are just some of the advantages which could accrue from doing that. So rather than read them all out, I think most of these would be probably obvious to you, learning from the mistakes of others. This, actually, you could sometimes learn from the unfortunate people who are the first to implement something, and then they can sometimes get leapfrogged and overtaken by events, which is another interesting angle. But anyway. We think there are a number of advantages in at least having a process that people can try and follow to help them in the transferability analysis. So context conditions we have just heard, and we're just saying it again here. There's no two cities with exactly the same context conditions. Some are fairly similar, but some are very different in their geographical situation, their traffic mix, their degrees of congestion, the public transport organisation, the whole range of things where cities can differ. And obviously those are probably the first things to identify in any city if you're thinking of having a look at what was successful elsewhere to see what the differences are in context. And we obviously want to maximise the chances of success. That's what the idea of this process is. But as I just said also, if necessary, don't go ahead until you've at least got to grips with, well, what are these differences and can we resolve them, and then maybe come back to the issue again. Well, this is a good example. This chap from Venice trying to sell his transport system to somebody in the desert. That, of course, usually they're not as obvious as this. There's usually something. Usually it's more subtle, the differences. And we have another term, a phrase in the UK, it might be used in Europe, that the devil is in the detail. So the detail of things can often, if you're not careful, can include things which really can be quite difficult to resolve. And I say this is just a big, obvious no-no in that case. So moving on to the TIDE transferability methodology, we're looking at a systematic qualitative. Yeah, okay, there's a few numbers here and there, but not a lot, to analyse the potential transferability. We've tried to make it usable for practitioners in cities. I mean, coming from academia, we have to be careful that we don't produce things for other academics that only academics read. And unfortunately, I'd have to criticise our own profession for that. In my opinion, the perception of success for an academic is often how many peer-reviewed journal papers you've written, and sometimes they don't get read at all by practitioners. So this takes a little while to change that perception, I think. But anyway, we will be producing this handbook for transferability analysis. We're in the process at the moment of writing it out, giving some examples, and moving forward on that basis. So we have a 7-step methodology that we've developed in TIDE. Now this is supposed to be a generic methodology. Obviously TIDE has a wide range of different measures that we're looking at. So hopefully any one of these measures could be and is being put through this methodology actually, which will sometimes cause some constructive criticism, which is always useful. But this is where we are really with it to the moment. So I thought I'd just run through these steps, and I've taken the liberty, being from the UK, of taking a UK example, which is an advanced public transport priority. If we were to move it from London to Southampton where I work. So it's a bit easier for me to do that one. I should have chosen a cross-European one really, but anyway, the principle is still the same. And this is just to illustrate some aspects of the methodology as we go through. So the first thing, the step one was this mission statement or clear objectives, what is trying to be achieved here, and there has to be, I think, some agreement here and acceptance of what can be achieved and what can't, the realistic scope, and this is really quite important to get this, I think, out in the open straight away when you're thinking of the transferability. Now, for the purpose of this presentation, I've had to reduce things rather more than if you were doing this in earnest, because we'd be here for rather longer than we have, I think. But the very simple mission statement in this case might be to provide priority to buses at traffic signals to improve their regularity. And in this case, it's the regularity bit that was important. So London has a system that does that and Southampton doesn't. So it would like to possibly, I'm imagining. I was thinking of trying to have a system to look at the regularity issues and how you might do it. So the next thing to do is to have a think, well, what are all the impacts of this? Well, this is the generic one. I mean, there may be lots of impacts from different measures. Efficiency, environment and safety will almost always be there in some form, but there are other measures here, and the guidelines will have some advice and some suggestions about what you might want to consider. But I think you have to always think about positive impacts and potential negative ones. There may well be potential negative impacts with some things. And for this one in bus priority, you know, there's a lot of things that we might be wanting to try and do with this system to help buses, to help passengers, to help revenue, to help reduce costs, try and get modal change. But this could be a devil in the detail issue here. If you get it wrong, you might cause a problem to the traffic in the city generally and actually increase some of these things, delays and operating costs for vehicles and such like. So I think you need to be aware of the impacts, and this is where the so-called pioneer city should be the leader really in having hopefully have done a proper scientific evaluation of their measure in the first place. Now don't imagine that they always have, because this is doesn't always happen, but at least they'll have hopefully some advice and some impact measurements that they can advise to the adopter city. Okay, upscaling or downscaling. So there's another little cartoon. It worked, this little balloon. Small scale was fine. You try and expand it to a big network, bang, the whole thing doesn't work. Which could be, certainly has happened in some systems where the communications infrastructure wasn't sufficient to cope with an upscaling of certain activities in monitoring transport systems. Maybe that's less so now with the advances in technology, but nevertheless you've got to realise that there can be some quite big issues going from a small system to a larger one. Right, so in our case, our example, Southampton's much smaller than London, so actually we're talking about downscaling in terms of the size of the system and what it needs to be able to do. And another important issue is in the UK we have different models of bus operations. So Southampton would have to consider this. In London it's a regulated system with a franchised bus services. In Southampton it's a deregulated system where the county council, the city council has rather less control on what goes on. So that would have to be addressed in the early stages. And it could be a showstopper on occasions, these sorts of organisational issues. Okay, and then we have to start going through a list of components and subcomponents in terms of policy, stakeholders, finance, technical requirements, and then each of these might have a subcomponent. And so I think all we can do is to give some advice in the handbook about the sorts of things that really should be thought of on the way through. For example, strategies and policies. There'd be no point going ahead with bus priority if that wasn't in the policy of the city authority. If a public transport support policy didn't exist, and if the traffic management policies, such as they are, didn't I suppose appreciate that there should be moving people efficiently and not just cars. You would need to have the right context there, I think, for this to be a success. And finances will always come into it, even more at the moment, I'm afraid, with certainly in the UK there's a very tight operating budgets for local authorities now, and I imagine that's probably true in a lot of other European countries. But it goes on, stakeholders, technical requirements and things to at least have a quick look at. Do I need to think of this or this or this on the way through? So it's like a checklist, really. And then we could try and, I suppose this gets a little bit controversial, but to try and put some level of importance on these things according to the pioneer city. Are they really important things or perhaps less important? And here we've just gone for, so it's a similar list of subcomponents, and whether these are thought to be important, and if so, what's the comment that is justifying that level? Could be high, medium, or low, so that at least you've got some sort of thing written out there, and you can refer back to that when decisions are being made later on. And then we've got to, well, this again could be discussed, but is trying to look and see for these components whether it really is a good case for transferability, or whether there is a modest or strong constraint. At this stage, we're more interested in probably in the constraints. What could stop it happening? So I could say in this one, just taking finances, that after the financial calculations have been done, you've got a -1. So there's a modest situation there that really is, can we really afford this? So, but it's still just using a fairly simple assessment at the moment. Of course, it's possible to, if you get through this whole system and think, well, I still don't quite know, but the finances are the main issue, then you probably have to go into more of a cost-benefit analysis in another level of detail than we're doing here. But of course, there's, for some city authorities, and probably for everybody, there's quite a difference between finance and economics. Finance is in here, they've got to actually pay taxpayers' money on a system, and economics, just the calculation of the benefits coming back, which is not hard cash. So they're going to be thinking of things in maybe a slightly different way than we sometimes do. So anyway, that's where we were with that one. And then you could draw some initial conclusions. Obviously, if you finish up with a table full of -2s, then you really are in a lot of problems for transferability. And I think the conclusion would have to be you can't really transfer this at the moment until you can overcome what's causing all these minuses in your table. One or two modest constraints, possibly there's a way of dealing with them, but that needs more work. And then hopefully, if there's no constraints, the measure could be transferred. Now, whether that means it should be is still up to the city authorities, because they will have a finite pot of money that they could invest in lots of things, not just transport, probably. It could be schools, it could be hospitals, it could be all sorts of things. But at least this method will say, okay, this is transferable and it should give a real benefit to the city in the transport terms. And then obviously other people might come in with decisions or comments after that. So in Southampton, we could say it's potentially transferable, but there is a difficulty, could be with cost in the current climate. And the bus operators' support, they may well need convincing, especially if they're expected to put up some of the finance for this system and they don't believe they will get the revenue back through the fare box. And so I think in the UK context, this could be quite an issue. But it could be successful, and we could see, I thought I'd show you a Southampton blue bus instead of a London red one. But this chappie's got through on the green, or is just about to. And so I've been relatively brief there, but just left a few minutes if there's any questions. And certainly we can feed you more information about the method. We certainly got some documents on it. Thank you. Yeah.